Former WWE Smackdown Women's Champion Sasha Banks hasn't stepped foot in a wrestling ring since the WrestleMania 37 Night 1 main event. Having lost the title to newcomer Bianca Belair, Sasha Banks would only appear in a couple of segments after WrestleMania, all backstage before vanishing basically without a trace. I'm Tom Colohue, and today I'm explaining where Sasha Banks has been and what she'll be doing when she returns in the build to WWE Summerslam 2021. Be sure to like the video, comment your thoughts and subscribe if you haven't already. That will be a big help to the growth of the channel and I'd very much appreciate it. Sasha Banks has taken time off from the WWE post WrestleMania before. After losing the WWE Women's Tag Team Championships alongside Bayley to the Iconics, Sasha took a mental health break. At the time there were reports about a full-scale breakdown backstage in the locker room, but they were quickly proven to be untrue. During that time I reported that she had intentionally been given time off, with the WWE treating it as nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, she spent a lot of that time in extra wrestling training which she would bring into her wrestling when she did return, and basically trolling Vince McMahon in a way that he very much enjoyed. A link to the article in which I reported this is in the description of the video. This resulted in quite a large change to WWE policy, a change that's bigger than it had initially seemed, and really it's a service that Sasha Banks sort of unintentionally provided to the entire locker room. We're actually seeing this change of policy in action as we speak right now. Since then, and particularly in our current age of the pandemic, the WWE have been much more willing to let their talent take time off pretty much upon request. Most recently, we've seen this with Kevin Owens, who only very recently said on Twitter after losing in a match at Hell in a Cell that he would be taking a little time away to heal and look after himself. It is after all far from the only service that Sasha Banks has provided to that locker room. If you look at how the WWE Tag Team Championships were brought in essentially by Sasha Banks and Bayley constantly annoying Vince McMahon until they got their way, and they've got a lot more women onto the cards than they had been previously. It's also made the WWE a lot more sensitive to certain superstars. Sasha Banks' overall value to the WWE roster is one of the highest on the roster. On SmackDown at least, she's basically second only to Roman Reigns and possibly Seth Rollins. The WWE are simply unwilling to risk losing her, so regular time off upon request is very much in her future. Sasha Banks is also becoming increasingly more successful in a mainstream setting. The success of The Mandalorian and her relative success as an individual has been very beneficial to the WWE itself overall. To say that the company and Vince McMahon personally are very interested in letting people take a bit of time off if that means going to Hollywood and getting more eyes on the WWE product would be a massive understatement. So where is Sasha Banks? Well, essentially, she's too important to be there. If you follow on Twitch over at twitch.tv/Tom Colohue, this is something we've been talking about for well over a month, but I'm going to go into some real fine detail here. There are currently only 7 women on the SmackDown roster. Sasha Banks, Bianca Belair, Bayley, Natalya, Tamina, Carmella and Liv Morgan. Sasha Banks is considered to be by far the most valuable and the most important. Each individual woman has had their own individual struggles, but Sasha Banks is the cream of the crop in WWE settings. Carmella, having lost repeatedly to Sasha Banks after finally returning from a long hiatus, has been defined down so heavily that it's usually a surprise to see her on TV at this point. Liv Morgan has the unfortunate distinction of being the literal bottom of the pile. Sasha Banks is not in the tag division, and at the moment, more often than not, neither are the tag team champions. Going into Money in the Bank, Natalya and Tamina are more likely to be needed for that match, especially as it is going to be 8 women, 4 from SmackDown, and there's only 7 there. That leaves Bayley and Bianca Belair to feud over the SmackDown Women's Championship at the top of the ladder. When Belair and Banks were feuding, it was Bayley who was a forgotten woman. Now at this point, if Sasha Banks was still on TV, she would be the forgotten woman instead, and you simply cannot do that to your top draw. Essentially what that means is, had Sasha Banks remained a TV regular, she would have had to continue the feud with Bianca Belair, keeping Bayley off TV and making a feud go essentially from January until August, a 7-month long feud that I don't think any of us really have the patience for anymore. The feud was already played out. Bayley would have had nothing to do all year. There is also always a temptation amongst the WWE hierarchy to pair up Banks and Bayley and put them back into a tag division that right now desperately needs tag teams. Bayley's face run when she first joined the main roster was entirely defined by Sasha Banks, and it's only since Sasha Banks and Bayley really split up that Bayley fully came into her own. When is Sasha Banks expected to return? Very soon. In fact, she's expected to return to the WWE on July 16th on the Go Home show for SmackDown before the Money in the Bank pay-per-view. She is not at this time expected to feature in a match at the pay-per-view. This is also the first show with fans back, and she's not the only big name going to be there. Edge, for example, is expected there too. Is Sasha there to pop a rating? Definitely. Is she there to help sell tickets? Absolutely. The WWE want to hit the ground running, and the best way to do that is to sell out the first show and then go from there. They were struggling beforehand to actually fill arenas, and that's something that a lot of people have forgotten and certainly will not remember when we first get fans back, that a non-full arena is not out of the ordinary. More importantly for Sasha Banks, she's there to begin the push to SummerSlam. SummerSlam this year is planned to be the biggest show of the year. The WWE wants SummerSlam to eclipse WrestleMania, which was of course 2 nights. Of course, with SummerSlam on a Saturday, it's also possible, though unlikely, that this will be 2 nights as well. We did have a 2-night SummerSlam last year, they just called the second night Payback. Rumoured matches for the summer show of shows are Edge vs Seth Rollins, Roman Reigns vs John Cena, and Bobby Lashley vs Brock Lesnar. Also expected is Sasha Banks returning to pay-per-view competition to renew hostilities with Bianca Belair. The SmackDown Women's Championship will be on the line, with Sasha Banks being the favourite to regain the championship that she lost to Belair at WrestleMania, clean as you like. Now there is a lot at play here. There is a Money in the Bank winner to factor in. There is a draft planned right after SummerSlam, which could change everything because Vince McMahon and the creative team are notorious for making their plans so last minute that they have abandoned storylines that were introduced literally the week of the draft before now. Changes to both rosters will be made, with swaps between being bolstered by significant call-ups from NXT. There is also a video about that on this channel that you can check out. If you've been watching over at twitch.tv/Tom Colohue, we've been covering this news for a long time. This is also true of the Edge news, expected call-ups and much more. Please remember to subscribe to this channel and check out Twitch for more information as well. Sasha Banks is one of the key figures of the entire WWE, and on the internal roster list, she is considered to be number 2 in the entire women's division across all brands. When she returns in mid-July, she will be in every second hour draw segment once again, no doubt, and will be a key part of WWE programming going forwards. Meanwhile, she will continue to work in Hollywood, coming closer and closer into at least the WWE's goal of building another The Rock. Let me know in the comments if you've missed her and what you think her next steps will be. Be sure to subscribe, like, and if you haven't already, check out twitch.tv/Tom Colohue, where we report a lot of news on Mondays and Fridays during our spoiler warning show. We also host regular watch-alongs of Raw and SmackDown, and we do gaming content on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so if you're interested, check it out. Until then, I've been Tom Colohue, and thank you very much for watching.